Fullbrook is the Deputy Director at Al Bayan Bilingual School, Kuwait. Having started his career as a math and physical education teacher in a remote Australian school, he then worked at a range of schools across the country before serving in leadership positions in the Middle East, China, and Australia. Having participated in the think tank on global education at the Harvard Graduate School of Education in 2016, Mr. Kevin went on to be named as one of The Educator magazine's rising stars of education under the age of 40. Congratulations, sir, and we are so proud to have you here. He is a 100 Global Innovation Ambassador and country lead for the 100 project out of Finland, which is a not-for-profit organization and seeks out and shares outstanding educational innovation around the globe. He is a Bachelor in Applied Science, Bachelor of Education, an MBA, and is a fully qualified Justice of the Peace. I'm just so stunned to see this particular title, sir. It's a new one for me, Justice of the Peace, and I'm highly intrigued. I would like to know in detail later in person. Today's talk is on the topic of design thinking and co-creation as community building tools. We all belong to a very, very special community, and that is our school community. Though I believe today's talk will give us these tools and explain to us how to apply these tools of design thinking and co-creation in any community we belong to, but especially I look forward to learning how these two can be used in bringing that community environment, a close-knit culture in our school, in our classrooms, with all the stakeholders of our school community. This talk is going to cover how the design thinking process can be embedded in the curriculum and in how everyone, all the employees, all the staff work in this direction. It will help us understand how to examine problems and solve them using collaborative design-centered approaches and the resources that support this collaboration and engagement. So friends, design thinking is a methodological approach to problem solving or achieving an objective in a systematic, planned way. It's a process through which innovative ideas and thoughts, products and services can be generated by collective brainstorming and rational empathizing. To throw light on this very relevant topic for educators and school leaders, I now invite Mr. Fullbrook. Sir, once again, a warm welcome to you, and you may please now take over.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that wonderful warm welcome. And before I start, congratulations for establishing and providing this platform for your community. It's it's something that serves a keen need for your community in sharing these stories and ideas and having a platform for conversation. So well done to you and your community, and I'm certainly very honored to be with you today. So
thank you so much, sir. I request all the participants to kindly keep themselves on mute, and you may feel free to share your thoughts, questions, ideas in the chat box. Over to you, sir, now.
Okay, can everyone see my screen okay there now?
Not yet. Yes, sir. Now we can see it.
Yes. Okay, wonderful. So what I hope to do today is perhaps take around 40 minutes to share some ideas with you, and then we can leave some time at the end for the more interesting discussion and questions, because invariably when you talk about things like this, such as design thinking and co-creation, questions come up. Well, what does this look like in a school? What if I have this particular challenge? What if, would it work in this particular situation that I have in my context? And those are all really interesting and important questions and conversations that I'm happy to have. So what I'm sharing with you today is, I'm not coming to you as an expert in design thinking or co-creation. I'm coming to you as someone who works in a school, has worked in a range of schools, who has used this a lot. I've used this a lot with a range of different people in different situations, from students to parents to staff to community groups, and a mix of all those different people together over quite a number of years. And I'm here to share, I guess, my experiences, the challenges I've had, how we've overcome those. And that's basically it. So what we're looking to do today is talk about these key things. Why would you do something like this? What is the benefit of approaching community building or problem solving in this way? That's the why. How do you go about it? What are the nuts and the bolts? What are the specific things that will help to make this type of approach successful should you wish to use it? And then some important what if questions. So what if it doesn't work? What if you have difficult, challenging parents as a part of your school community? What if your students are not used to working in this way? We'll talk about how you can approach some of those challenges, which in many cases are benefits. You look for those challenges in many of these instances. And really what I hope you take away from this session is just one thing that resonates with you, or that interests you, or that sparks your curiosity to find out more about trying this in your setting, wherever you might be. You don't have to agree with everything. You don't have to take all of it away and try everything all at once. But hopefully there's one thing in there that makes you think, look, there's something in this, and there is something here that I'd like to try in something that you have in the back of your mind where you can see a possibility. Hopefully that is the outcome of today. So when we're talking about co-creation, what are we really talking about? We're talking about a process that has a certain set of characteristics as you move through a process of co-creation. Being flexible, being adaptable, and being a learning system. So it's really a learning process as you embark on this.
So you seem to be on mute.
Oh, there we go. Okay. So when we talk about co-creation and design,
Ms. Nisha Singh, please stop presenting. Participants, kindly be conscious and do not present your screens. Yes,
okay.
sir. You may continue.
Okay, so when we are talking about co-creation design thinking, it's really focused on how people work together. Well, and while the end product, the final product is important, but it's also very important to focus on how people are working together during the entire process. And it's about building something together step by step and taking one step at a time. And we'll talk about that in a moment. It's also important to have tools and frameworks that guide you on when to think and when to act, and everything in between. For people that have kind of tried this type of approach before, there can be some real challenges that sometimes the group will get caught in the theoretical aspects, in the discussion and the conversation and thinking about the problem, but not actually get to any action or work product. And sometimes the opposite can happen. It's all action and rushing to a solution without taking enough time at the beginning to really think through and frame the problem that you're actually trying to solve. So getting that balance right is really important. And When we talk about co-creation, it's really on a continuum of coming to a solution for a particular problem. So at one end of a continuum is feedback. So for example, if I am in a school developing a school reopening plan, if like in Kuwait, students are learning 100% online from home, you'll be developing reopening plans for when they're eventually allowed to come back to campus. So to take a feedback approach at one end of this continuum, you would just be saying, well, I'm going to develop this solution myself, and then I'm just going to give it to someone and say, can you give me some feedback on what I've done here? And you may take into account some of that feedback, or you might not. But basically, you're doing everything yourself, or one or two people. A little bit further down the continuum, as you open things up a little bit, is consultation. So before it's actually finished, you might actually sit down and have a conversation with someone, ask them what's important to you to be in this reopening plan. What do you think it should include? If we keep looking further down, is engagement. So not just asking people what they think, but including people in framing the problem, or perhaps giving some assistance with brainstorming for solutions, for example, through to collaboration. So you might call a couple of meetings, an example of collaboration. You might call a couple of the meetings where you do a bit of work. You'll call maybe a few parents or a few faculty in and say, okay, let's have a look at what we've got so far. What else can we put into this? They all go away, you do a bit more work and finish it off. That's a typical kind of collaboration model. But where we're really talking about, right at the far end of this continuum, is thinking about co-creation. So getting everyone together from the beginning, and before you've done very much work at all, is sitting people down and say, okay, we are going to create this together. We're going to frame the problem, we're going to brainstorm solutions and move forward together as a group. We're not going to do it separately. So you might think about some of the things that you have done or led and been involved at, and where they fit on this continuum of engagement and co-creation. Now, what typically happens in schools is that if this diagram sort of reflects the different conversations that happen. So staff and students kind of have conversations, and staff and parents have separate different conversations, and parents talk to their children at home, but they're all very separate. They're all very disconnected. And what we really want to try and do as part of co-creation is bring all those people together. Why can't we have those conversations in the same room at the same time? It's really so much more powerful. And that's the idea behind co-creation and design thinking, is getting the people together in the same place at the same time to solve these problems or challenges. Now, design thinking is one model that you can use to solve challenges, to address problems, to co-create. It is just one model. There are plenty of models out there. This is the one that I have the most experience with, that I think is a really powerful framework to solve challenges as they come to us, particularly in education. It's really a process for creative problem solving. Design thinking really has people at the center. It's about the people working on it and the people that you are designing solutions for. So often we lose that when we're addressing challenges. We don't put ourselves in the shoes of the people who will be receiving the solution that we come up with, whether that be students or the community or parents. So if we're creating something that's going to address a student challenge or a parent challenge, doesn't it make sense that we include those people as a part of that process? I would argue that yes, of course. And I'll give you some examples of how we've done that in the past. Now, for those of you that are not familiar or just a little bit familiar with design thinking, basically it's a framework, as I said, for innovation or creative problem solving. And there are many different visual representations of what design thinking can look like. And this is just one of many. But I do like this one for the way it's represented. Each of the ways that it is represented has the same elements. Diagrams may look slightly different, but it has the same elements. And it starts in the top left-hand corner with empathizing. So really working out what is the actual problem, getting to the core of the problem and what has led to the problem. Really empathizing with the people who this is a challenge for, stepping into their shoes, experiencing it how they would experience it. Because unless you really understand the root cause of a problem, it's really difficult to come up with a solution. I mean, if you can think about all the different times you've created a solution for something that's kind of missed the mark, it hasn't really solved the problem you were looking to solve. And that's probably because we haven't spent enough time at the empathy stage. If we move down to the define stage, once we've empathized and we really understand the root cause of a problem, then we can start to actually define the problem clearly. Albert Einstein is credited with this quote. He said, if I was given an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes defining the problem and spend 5 minutes on working on the solution. So down here, defining the problem. Why is it important? Researching, observing, understanding the point of view. After defining, we go up here to the top right-hand corner to ideate. This is like a brainstorming stage where there's no wrong answers. You're after the good, the bad, and the ugly, and you're doing it for a significant period of time. You're not just stopping after a couple of minutes when you have some obvious solutions. You want the non-obvious solutions. You want the solutions that are kind of out of left field. Then you go down to the bottom right-hand corner, prototyping. So once you have a couple of solutions and you've narrowed them down, you want to prototype a couple of them. And then you want to test them out. Do they actually work? Just because you prototype something and you have a solution doesn't mean it has to be the final solution. You need to test it out. You need to see, is this going to work? Likely the first time around, it may not work. And you need to go back and either ideate again or prototype again. And that's referenced by the loop here, that it is not a linear process, that at any stage, if you're prototyping and it's not working, you may have to go back to brainstorming. If you're having trouble with brainstorming, perhaps you haven't defined the problem clearly enough. And that's one thing I really like about design thinking, that it is not a linear process. You can move backwards and forwards as the situation and the context dictates. So why would we bother doing this? Well, partly you get better outcomes for our students. Really, that's the core of our job is learning outcomes for our students. So while it does take a little longer, you get better outcomes. You get closer links with your community because you're involving them in solving challenges that directly affect them. You get more buy-in and ownership from the people you involve. There's the opportunity for co-badged programs. For example, local NGOs or other things that you might partner with, co-badge particular programs or solutions. You may find that pathways to additional funding, expertise, or other resources, depending on who you include as a part of this process. And by including these people, particularly if you have high staff turnover, if you're in an international school, then your families and parents and students, they may be the people who have the most institutional knowledge in your community. So if you're not including them, you're really missing out on a really valuable resource in your community that you can be making the most of. Now, design thinking is not to be used in any challenge or problem that you come across. So it's important to identify, well, which situations call for a design thinking approach. And when you have challenges or problems, it can be helpful to think about them in terms of simple versus complicated versus complex problems. Simple problems are the ones that you can make on the spot. As an experienced teacher or educator or leader, you make on the spot. You don't need to think about it. You've done this before many times. It's a simple answer. That doesn't, that type of situation, don't use a design thinking approach. It's going to chew up time. You're going to get to the same answer. What we're looking about is complicated versus complex problems. So just bear with me as a moment. A complicated problem, for example, is sending a rocket to the moon. So formula processes are important. Once you've done it once, it's pretty easy to replicate. You can do it over and over again. Future chances of success are very high because rockets are similar and each subsequent time is similar and perhaps easier. That's a complicated problem where you're just replicating a solution, and it works in those situations. Compare that to a complex challenge, raising a child, for example. Not that a child is a problem. So I have two children, a boy and a girl. I have a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old, and they are completely different. They are completely different personalities, completely different in almost every way. And you know, those of you who are parents, I can see you nodding your head and agreeing with me that, you know, each child is different. You can't use formula. And what worked for one child, it gives you some experience, but it doesn't mean that's going to work with your other children. That each child is unique. You need to approach them individually. And just because you may have done it or approached it once with some success doesn't mean you're any likely to have more success with other children or any less challenges. So the difference there between complicated and complex problems, so where design thinking comes in is for complex problems where you need new solutions. You have the same challenge, the same kind of challenge exists, but you're looking for new solutions for a particular context or something else. So what can be useful to think about is, in your particular context or school or wherever you are, do you approach challenges as complicated or as complex? And are you identifying them correctly? Because they require different approaches. I'll give you another example. The same problem here exists, the same challenge where you have two intersecting roads and you need to manage the flow of traffic safely in those intersecting roads. So one challenge, same problem, but two different solutions. One is traffic lights, one is roundabouts. Two very different solutions to the same problem. But they differ in really key, unique ways. So traffic lights, for example, they have a set rules and procedures. You don't need any individual thought, decision-making, no judgment. Red is stop, green is go. That's about it. Versus roundabouts, which basically say, you've just got one sort of general vague guideline, which is if a car's already in the roundabout, give way to it. Otherwise, you know, you'll work it out essentially. And that's it. So two very different solutions to the same problem. And, you know, research across countries and across time show that roundabouts are the much safer solution, much less accidents at roundabouts, higher traffic flow through roundabouts, which is a little counterintuitive, but research after research shows that that's the case. Which is really interesting to think about, because in your school or your organization, in what circumstances and situations do you put in metaphorical traffic lights or roundabouts? Do you put things where people have little flexibility or freedom, that they're just responding to a prompt? So if this happens, I want you to do that. If this happens, then you do this. Or do you trust people's judgment, their professionalism, their experience, their knowledge, and do you give them some guidelines, like, you know, guiding statements typically in school, mission statement, this is school values, respect, integrity, other things. Do you give them a set of guidelines and say, we trust you to make good judgments and decisions around this? It's interesting to think about if you think back with how you've addressed certain challenges in the past, which of these have you more gravitated towards? So a book that I really enjoyed, and I recommend for you to read it if you have time, is Todd Rose and the End of Average. And he talks about, in this book, a web of development, which has a lot of parallels to design thinking, in that there is no one clear linear path to a solution to a problem or a challenge. There can be many different paths, and it's about being open to the possibilities that the process of design thinking may take you on alternative pathways. It is still very important that you have your success criteria there at the end. For example, if we use the example of developing a school reopening plan, your success criteria is that your community, your students, your parents feel comfortable and safe and reassured to send their children back to school in safe and appropriate ways. Your success criteria still remains the same, but how you get there may be very different. Are you including students in your planning? Are you including parents, local health authorities, your staff who will be teaching, your support staff, your guards, your maintenance? Are you including all of those in the process of developing these plans? Another book that I really enjoyed is this book by Doris Kearns Goodwin, Team of Rivals. Now, although it's about Abraham Lincoln, that's not why I like the book. I like the book because it really talked about how he brought together a range of diverse people onto his team to solve some of the really big challenges of his time in America that they were going through. He didn't just bring on board people that he liked or were compliant or were going to agree with him. He put people on that did not like him. He brought people onto his team that were going to disagree with him. And we're going to offer a different point of view, because basically you get better solutions that way. If you're in a room where everyone is agreeing and nodding their heads, then you're not going to get really great solutions, or as good solutions as you might if you have a really diverse range of perspectives, opinions, and other things. So think something again to reflect on. You know, as you form different collaborative groups and involve people in processes, who are the people you are asking to join? Are you asking people that aren't going to cause arguments? Something to reflect on. Now, some of the potential challenges. Now, there are always challenges in using design thinking, and particularly the more complex the challenge, the more opportunities for things to be difficult along the way. In some ways, it can be confronting and challenging for staff. So, for example, if you have a really diverse group that are doing let's say, revamping your behavior classroom management policy, typically you might just you do it yourself as an administrator. But what if you had students with you, and teachers and parents in the same room, throwing ideas around about what this could best look like for your school? That might be really challenging and confronting for staff, because as teachers, as educators, we get very, because we're passionate about our jobs and what we do, we tend to get very possessive about things we do and what we create. And it can be hard to kind of let go of that. So that's a challenge to look out for. Focusing and channeling the conversation and effort. So the more diverse the group, the easier it is to get off on a tangent and to want to solve a whole range of different problems. So trying to be focus the conversation and effort and channel that and the challenge in hand and keep people on track can be difficult sometimes. Setting clear guidelines and ways of working can also be a difficulty if you have students in your group who aren't used to working in this way or aren't used to working on these kinds of things with adults. That can be a challenge. If you have parents, if you have the CEO of a company joining you and having input as part of this process, they may not like letting go a bit of control or having an open discussion or being challenged on ideas that they may raise. So it's important at the beginning to set clear guidelines that, you know, we're going to put all our ideas on the table. We're not going to make things personal. Every person's idea is valued and valid, and whatever you decide as a group. Capping expectations is important. You're not going to solve everything in the time you have. You need to be specific and focused, and it needs to be achievable as well. And it can be challenging when you get to disagreement, which is inevitable. People will not agree all the time on everything. So how are you going to lead that team through that disagreement? How are you going to build a consensus around a way forward? What are some strategies or tips you might use? We'll talk about some in a moment. Which leads me to, what if things go wrong? Now, it's important that you're open to new ideas and suggestions, and the people in your group have to be open to new ideas and suggestions. And you need to be aware of your own cognitive biases as well. So if you are facilitating and leading the work, that it as equally, if not more, applies to you as the facilitator of that group, that just because you suggest something, you need to be prepared to accept that it could be wrong and that people will challenge you on that. And how you respond and how you manage that is going to set the tone for that group and be a model for how the group will respond in that way. Using the idea of an idea meritocracy, which is basically saying essentially the best idea wins, and it has nothing to do with the person who proposed it. So for example, if I'm in a room and I am the most senior person in the room, by virtue of my position, that doesn't make my idea any more valid or any more correct than anyone else's. And my idea gets thrown on the table the same as everyone else's. Whichever idea is the best wins. That's how it should work. And what can be really helpful is using open-ended probing questions to get people thinking. Because when you start this, particularly if it's a new process for you or others in the group, there might be a bit of hesitation to begin with. People, you know, will be worried. I don't want to look silly or foolish in front. I don't want to ask a silly question. It's going to take a while for people to warm up. So using open-ended and probing questions can really help to draw out people's personalities and ideas and get some healthy disagreement happening. These are some examples. If you're not aware of the National School Reform Faculty, NSRF, they have some wonderful resources and training materials available, many for free, some are paid, but they have a range of probing questions and as just one of the many resources they have, which I really like, and I have these as a card with me, a laminated card. So when I'm in some of these groups and meetings and part of processes, I have these handy. So if we get to kind of a loggerhead or an impasse or things slow down considerably, then we can ask some of these questions to get people thinking again in different ways, in creative ways. I particularly like the fourth one. If you had a magic wand, what would you change? Because invariably what happens is either one, people won't have really thought of what they actually really want. They know what the problem is, but they haven't thought of what they really want. And this gets them to think about that. The other unintended consequence of asking that question, and which is why I really like it, is that quite often their magic wand solution will be something that is actually possible when they think about it, because you're coming from a different perspective. You can say, well, actually, that is possible if we do X, Y, and Z. And some really great questions there to think about. Now, what about some opportunities for co-designing? Some are more obvious than others, but there are some really powerful opportunities if you want to take them in school settings. So an easy one is around planning for committees. I like this one because I don't really like planning for events, to be honest. So I like to get as many different other people involved as I can. And lots of people really, really enjoy this. It's not something that gets me out of bed or excites me in the morning, but for other people it is. So graduation planning, award ceremonies, sports days, back to school night, cultural performances. You know, you have really great opportunities to reinvent what these will look like, particularly during COVID times as we find ourselves. Plenty of schools, us included, have been going through this process. How do we reimagine our graduation ceremony? How do we reimagine our awards ceremony, our back to school night? Has been a really great opportunity for us to rethink some of our approaches in this area. As I mentioned before, behavior management, classroom management committees. Having students involved, this was such a powerful process for us a couple of years ago when we reviewed our behavior management policy. We invited students and we invited parents in, staff, administrators, and we had some really robust, challenging conversations. And I'm so glad we took the time to invite our students and get their input and feedback, because that made our end result, our solution, our final product so much more powerful, because there were some things we just didn't realize, because the very first step of design thinking is empathy. So we were designing these classroom management processes and procedures without the end user in mind, without the student in mind. We weren't putting ourselves in their shoes. And they were really honest. And when you you guys know this, when you ask kids, they're going to be really honest with you. I think that's why a lot of us work in education. We get a lot of energy, and being around children is so refreshing, because they're honest with you, and they'll tell you. On curriculum teams, reviewing curriculum, reviewing assessment for relevance, for alignment, so many different things, you'll get a richer outcome. Student leadership forums, we'll have student leadership groups in our schools. How are they challenging problems that are, and solutions that are in front of them? Coffee time. So we invite our parents and we invite our staff once a month to sit with us as directors of the school. Has an open sort of town hall style meeting. So that's another element of empathizing. You know, how do we know what the problems or the challenges are if we don't ask? We can assume what they are, and we'll probably be wrong. But we need to ask. We need to give people the opportunity to talk to us and ask us questions, and to let us know what their challenges are. Reviewing events, a range of different things. Another one of my favorites is down the bottom there, principal for a day. So every year we have a bit of a competition, invite one of our students to be a principal for a day. And we make a big deal of it. They go to meetings around the playground, they talk on assembly, lots of really interesting things that they can do and get up to. So really, when taking this kind of approach, it's important to be intentional. You can't just take a couple of tentative steps and say, well, let's just see where this goes. You need to be really intentional, have some success criteria laid out, and be clear yourself about the steps in the process and when to move forward. You need to plan really well. And it's not about planning the solution to the problem, it's about planning the process. So what tools and resources and other things will you use to support that? And I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. You need to prepare for the challenges, so because they will happen. So what happens when there is a disagreement among your group? How are you as the facilitator going to address that? You need to have thought this through and thought through some scenarios of how you're going to approach these things. Now, what people tend to do is avoid uncomfortableness. We don't, as human beings, we don't really need or seek out conflict or disagreement or uncomfortableness, but there needs to be an element of that to come up with better solutions. So thinking about often what are the questions that aren't being asked? What are people too afraid to ask or worried to ask? Those are the things you need to bring into the surface. So looking for that within reason, that uncomfortable space to move into, and that's where the challenge lies. You need to start with the end in mind, having your success criteria there, but be open to a range of possibilities. So there are my contact details there. If you, I'd love to connect with you or hear from you, feel free to reach out. And you know, now it's time for questions. I'm happy to comments or questions, discussion. Happy to hear from you.
Hello. Yes, sir. Thank you very, very much for this detailed explanation of how conscious planning, involving everyone in a democratic way, valuing everyone's opinion, whether it is in agreement or disagreement with your opinion, plays an important role in creating a respectful and a fully functional, creative community. It applies to each one of us, whether it is a teacher who is taking a classroom as a community, or it is school principals, leaders who take the whole school as a community comprising of parents, students, staff, and everyone else involved. I would request the participants to type their questions if they have any questions.
And just while we're waiting for some questions there, in terms of specific resources that we have used or anyone can use at different stages of the design thinking process, for example, brainstorming, there are any, you know, dozens and dozens of different tools and resources that are out there online, whether virtual tools or pen and paper tools, to support that brainstorming process. And you do need some resources there to help guide the thinking, because where you want to start with convergent thinking, you want to open up possibilities, what are the broadest range of ideas that we have. And then at some point, after you've explored that for a while, then you want to bring that around to more divergent thinking and saying, okay, what are some of the crazier things we can start eliminating, and what are some of the better ideas that will start bubbling to the surface? And you know, some people work better pen and paper, some people work better on their laptop and online. It's about reading the group and finding a resource that works well for you.
Right. So I have been waiting for some questions from the participants. I haven't okay, there is a question by Miss Meera. Can you share specific examples of instances you have used design thinking and the tools that you used, challenges that came with it, and the solutions you employed?
Yeah, thanks, Meera. Great question. So, so I can give you a couple of examples. So, so it was about 2 years ago, we did quite a comprehensive review in our middle school of a range of different approaches and policies. And I sort of briefly mentioned a couple of them. One was around our curriculum offerings in our middle school, and one was around our behavior management plan and processes and approaches. So in the past, how we had done that is myself, another administrator, maybe a teacher, we'd sit down, we'd have a meeting, we'd have a look through everything, we'd sort of make a few adjustments, and then we'd publish it and it's done. We took a different approach, and we used essentially this approach where we invited 2 parents, we invited 2 students, we invited 2 staff members, and there was myself and another administrator. And we got them in a room and said, we got different groups together for each of these things. So we had a group together for our behavior management committee. We had another group for our curriculum review committee. We sat them down and said, for the behavior management committee, for example, we said, look, this is what we currently use. We want it to be better. We're open to seeing and exploring what this could look like. We are not wedded to anything. We have nothing preconceived in our mind, but we are open to doing better, being better, and this serving our community better. And that was our starting point. We started off by, like I said, with empathizing, so understanding the issues. So from a parent's point of view, what were the issues they saw with how we approach behavior in the school? We asked the kids, does our behavior management policy work for you? Is it too discipline-based rather than proactive or something else? Does it provide sufficient incentive for you to change your behavior? We asked lots and lots of questions, and they were really, really honest. It was really refreshing. And the end result through many meetings and iterations of our policy, we moved much more towards a restorative justice approach for behavior management. We involve students and parents now in the consequences for behavior and what that looks like. We did the same for our curriculum review, just quickly. We asked our parents, we asked our students, do our curriculum offerings, are they interesting to you? Are they exciting? Do you enjoy them? Are they challenging for you? What ones would you like to see? What courses would you like to take? How do you like to learn best? We asked lots and lots and lots and lots of questions. And we worked through some of those, what were challenging answers. We had to have a couple of side conversations with a parent once or twice who was, I guess, not really in the spirit of what we were hoping to do. They were overly negative and critical, and they weren't really focused on finding a solution. They were just wanted to focus on the problems. So we had to sort of draw them aside separately and just help them to understand what the process is. Same for the other committee we had on behavior management. Was talking on the side, separate from the meeting and the committee, with a couple of the teachers, and who were really defensive about letting go of years of classroom practice that had worked well enough for them, and helping them to understand why we were open at looking at other options. So it's all about how you handle those conversations. As for the tools, we used a range of different tools and different ones in each scenario. We used a commonly used brainstorming tool and an empathizing tool as well. If you've used a SWOT analysis before, SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, to draw out some ideas as brainstorming. If you've also seen in terms of identifying the root causes of a problem, if you've ever used a fishbone diagram before, if you Google fishbone diagram for problem solving, you'll see some examples there of getting to the core of what a problem is and all the different factors that can help you identify the best way to tackle a problem. So those are two good things that we've used in the past.
Thank you, sir. I think it was very concise, precise, and comprehensive. Thanks for sharing the actual relevant examples and the tools that can be used for solving them. I hope that answers Ms. Meera's question quite well. Moving on to some of the thoughts shared.
Question by Miss Madhu Khetan raised her hand to ask a question. Miss Madhu Khetan, you can unmute yourself and ask your question. Miss Madhu, you can ask your question by unmuting yourself or type in the chat box.
So meanwhile, Ms. Madhu types it. Let me read the question by Ms. Arundhati Das, who says, who asks, which one evokes more difficulty to solve, complex or complicated one, or it depends on situation or problem? I think you have already explained that, but still I would let you answer this question, sir.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So in complicated problems, solving it the first time can be really tough depending on the problem. But once you've solved it once, it's generally solved forever, and you're just kind of changing it each time. So it really depends on what the challenge is or the problem you're trying to solve. Generally speaking, the complex ones are tricky because they're just different every time. And sometimes it's hard to identify how different they are. They can be a little slipperier. But look, to be honest, the complex ones are a lot more fun. You know, it's a lot more interesting to get your teeth stuck into it and work with some, you know, interesting, diverse people to work out interesting solutions. So, I mean, I find it much more interesting working with complex problems.
Right, sir.
Sir, I have a question. You mentioned that design thinking is not a linear process. So while it's not a linear process, do you also indicate that there are multiple areas of design thinking that can function concurrently, or do you want to imply that the order can vary?
Yeah, thank you for your question. That's really, it's really interesting. And while it's not necessarily a linear process, I guess a better way to describe it is an iterative process, that you can go backwards and forwards, you can go backwards 2 steps, you know, and backwards 3 steps, back to the beginning if you have to. There can be loops in there. You know, you can skip ahead sometimes depending on the type of problem and how the team is approaching it. Yeah, so you can, it's because a linear process kind of evokes a sense of, well, I have to complete this step, and then I have to go to the next step, and then I can only go to the next step, and it's only moving forward in this one way. And really, that's not the case in this type of approach. There are those core elements. Generally speaking, they tend to happen in a certain order, but the flexibility is there that, as needed, you can move around, you can revisit things. There's a process of iteration involved that's really important, that isn't you know, isn't borne out in linear type processes.
Thank you, sir, for explaining very well that it's a dynamic process, and at any stage you can reconsider your previous steps and decisions and go back and work on it. You can even directly go to the very first step of defining the solution when you see that your tools are not working. So maybe you can see whether more brainstorming is needed or redefining of the problem itself is needed. So thank you so much for explaining. We have a question by Ms. Rainey. Are the solutions always those that everyone agrees on, or those that everyone is comfortable with? Or are there some people who may be reluctant with the solution? How would you deal with that? In fact, this is a question which I was about to ask you. So if I could add to Ms. Rainey's question, just to clarify my thought as well for the question to you. You know, as a school leader, you are dealing with students, parents, and the staff. And you could be a participatory leader who provides opportunities for everybody to brainstorm together, share their thoughts, bring their thoughts to the table, and involve everyone in, you know, the brainstorming process and decision making also. The question is, to what extent should everyone be involved? To what extent the popular opinion must be accepted, considering that the fact that the leader ultimately bears the weight of the impact of decisions on her or his shoulders? And then, is it only about you liking a solution that it should be implemented? Or, you know, what is the moral compass one should choose in such scenarios?
Yeah, what a fantastic question. And, you know, this comes up from time to time, and I've found myself in this position as well. And it's really important to think about how you're going to approach it if you're a school leader or you're facilitating the group. So what I've found is the most effective way to do it is when you're setting the expectations and you're framing the process right at the very beginning, because you're talking about how we're going to work as a group, the concept of an idea meritocracy, that everyone's opinion is valid and valued, and that the purpose of the process is hopefully around building a consensus behind a decision. But you also have to say, look, the reality of the situation is, by virtue of my position as the leader in the school, that should we come to an impasse or a disagreement, or something else that comes across, that ultimately, you know, I may have to make a decision that not all of us agree with. And, you know, when you frame that and you put that out on the table at the beginning, people understand that. People understand, you know, you can talk about that there may be information that I have in my position that is not common knowledge, that might be confidential. For example, budget related matters, or matters to do with the board of the school, or something else that is not common knowledge that may prevent us doing something in a certain way. And you can say, look, to the point at which I can, I will be as open and transparent as I can. Some things are simply confidential, but the purpose of this is to create a consensus, and wherever possible for us to work towards agreement. But in a case that that's not possible, then, you know, then that falls to me to make some difficult decisions. But I will make decisions that are aligned with our school's guiding statements, our vision and our mission, and always what is in the best interest of our students. You know, and reasonable people as a part of that process will understand that.
Very well said, sir. Thank you so much. I think it answers Ms. Rainey's question as well. You have to see what goes with the philosophy, the mission, vision of your school, what serves the bigger and the bigger purpose of your institution. And also, I feel to some extent, if you have a clear idea of what you believe in, with communication and discussion, you might also have people thinking in a similar way, or start thinking in a similar way. And at the same time, you have to be open to listening to their perspective as well. So it's ultimately all about respecting each other's views, finally going by a decision which works best for the students and is in line with the mission and vision of your school. Anyway, these are very complex situations and problems for which we cannot have a standard rule to be followed. So
of course, and that's where experience and practice come into it. The more you do this, the more comfortable you get with the process, the more comfortable others feel with the process, and the easier it becomes.
Absolutely, sir. Also, with time, we start understanding each person and where is that person or the thought is coming from. So, you know, it helps when you know the background of the person, the personality type, the interests, attitudes, etc. So then empathizing becomes easy with them and understanding why they say what they say. So thank you so much, sir. We also have thoughts shared by various participants here. We have the vice principal of our school, Dr. Smita, saying that designing is there all around us. It is not just limited to art or creativity. It's expression of thoughts. The students, teachers, how they deal with curriculum, how the school plans and delivers it, how we encourage students to design their thoughts in a positive direction. Everything is basically designing. So I am with you, Dr. Smita. I agree with what you have said. I feel that students must be given challenges to think about so that they can come up with a process of systematic solutions. And that's when they will be able to understand the designing approach. Am I right, sir?
Yes, 100%. I think we don't do enough in our schools to involve our students in key decisions. We do stuff for them and we give it to them. We don't involve them enough, and you'd be so surprised. I'm constantly surprised with, you know, when you ask questions of students, what they come up with, and you know, really insightful answers that perhaps some of us who've been in education for a while, that, you know, we think we know it all, or we have our blinkers on and we can only see things in one way. Our children just have their eyes wide open to so many different possibilities. So
so true. So true, sir. I have read certain examples where, you know, the students of the school devised ways which makes it easier for their physically challenged classmate to reach the school on time and in an easier way. The students also designed the whole approach to teaching the support staff of their school, the cleaning staff. So, you know, there are many such examples where children can come up with excellent ideas and they can execute it when they plan together and they design a solution to a particular problem. Ms. Usha Pujari, our secondary coordinator, says listening, reflecting, and thinking. Yes, very crucial. Ms. Arundhati Das has already asked a question. We have Mr. Rishiraj saying design thinking can be categorized as customization to a situation. Yes, I think what he means is customizing a solution to a particular problem. Do you have any thoughts about it, sir? Mr. Kevin?
in terms of customizing a solution to a particular problem?
Yes, sir. Is this what design thinking is all about?
Well, I guess sometimes that is about thinking, going back to complicated versus complex problems. If you have a complicated problem, you might look to just reassign a solution and just adapt it in a new way. You're kind of solving a similar problem with something that you've already done, and you can save yourself a lot of time. So reorienting some, you know, it's not saying everything we've done in the past is terrible. We're doing many good things. We have many strengths in every school, and those can be applied in different ways. So yeah, definitely readapting solutions in different ways, but it's about recognizing, and that's where professional judgment and experience comes in. And well, when do we need to take a fresh look at this from the beginning versus how similar to this is something we've already done and we can just do it again, is one of the challenges.
I would just like to mention, sir, that whatever you say, it has a lot of clarity. There is no, you know, new age lingo, the mumbo jumbo that you have used just to create an environment of an important presentation, but it is so apt, so relevant, and said in a language which every educator can understand. Hats off to you for that. I found you very grounded and humble in whatever you have shared with us. And this is the sentiment that all our participants are sharing here with us on the chat. Thanks to all the participants as well for being so engaged in this talk. The talk by sir was such that we all became engrossed in it. Thank you very much, sir. I would like to ask you one last question. From a teacher's perspective, imagining a classroom as a community, how, if there could be some examples, some practical tips of how teachers can create that classroom as a community by using the tools of design thinking and co-creating. And by that culture, I don't just mean academics or learning. It is the feel of a community in the classroom.
Yeah, what a great question. And look, there are many different really interesting ways that you can go about this, because I think there's many unintended consequences of approaching things in this way. Because when you do, and I'll share a couple of examples in a moment, but when you do approach things in this way with academics and with curriculum, with students in a classroom, because they have more buy-in, they feel like they have ownership, they feel like they feel more valued because you have asked their opinions and you've involved them, then many other things become more possible. They'll have a greater sense of well-being. They feel more valued. There will be stronger relationships within the classroom because they feel that the teacher values their input, what they have to say, and their classmates as well. So, for example, there are some areas like STEM or STEAM education where design thinking more is a more natural fit. solving technology challenges, other challenges by, a kind of modified scientific method almost. Where I like seeing them is some other areas like in the English or humanities or languages courses, or any subject, for example. So at the beginning of a unit, for example, asking the students, how would you best like to demonstrate your learning? So rather than saying you're going to have a test at the end of this, you're going to have an assignment and this is what I want you to do and this is how I want you to do it. Having a conversation with them and show how can you best demonstrate your learning to me? You ask them. For the talented artists in your class, that may be something that how they want to demonstrate their learning. Someone who is technology minded, someone who wants to stand in front of the class and talk about what they know and how they know it. There can be so many different ways. So even something simple like that, you're putting a lot more control back in the hands of student, and then you're helping them create it, because of course you can't just leave it like that. Students need some structure, they need some scaffolding, and they need some support, and that's where you can come in as the co-creation part and say, well, look, how can I support you to achieve this? What do you need from me to be able to produce this? How can I support or guide you? And then you're coming, closer alongside the student rather than a top-down telling them, this is what you're going to learn, this is how you're going to learn it, and this is how you're going to show me what you know. So just taking a slightly different take on that and thinking about what you can give a little bit of control up to, it can be really powerful.
Wonderful. So giving the control to children to some extent, giving them a sense of responsibility and a sense of freedom of expression and various other things that you've expressed would go a long way in creating that culture. Thank you very much for sharing that with us, sir. I think some simple ways of making them feel belonging to that particular class also would help a lot. Like the class can have its own method of greeting everyone in the morning. It could be a hi-fi, it could be something that you have created just for your classroom. The shout out louds in the classrooms where children celebrate each other's achievement and spread positivity. That also goes a long way. I have seen a beautiful example of a teacher creating Twitter culture in the class where the children write tweets appreciating the other students or tweet their thoughts. It's in a physical form on a chart, and the others are supposed to either like or comment on it, or they can retweet. So this way everyone gets a sense of recognition, and their individuality also grows. So these are simple ways, including students in creating classroom rules, etc. This can go a long way in creating that culture, co-creating for creating the culture of community. So you have spoken so well that it has made us think so much. I would like you to give your concluding thoughts, remarks, suggestions to all of us.
Yeah, look, and thank you again for the opportunity to join you here today. This is something that I really enjoy talking about, and then talking about with like-minded people who are passionate about education and doing the best for their communities. So it's such important work. And, I think it's about the most, if what you've heard today is something new for you, or something that feels a little bit out of your comfort zone, the first step is always the most difficult, and just taking that little bit of risk to start with, ripping that band-aid off, for example, is you very quickly work out that there's nothing to actually be worried about. If you think about, well, what's the worst that could happen? The worst that could happen is some really wonderful conversations could come of it with your colleagues and your students. So give it a go, practice it, and I hope there's been something today that's resonated with you, that hopefully you'll try something in your school or in your context.
So it has been one of the most enriching sessions of Aadharshila Talks. Thank you for accepting my invite and for being here so humbly, sharing your expertise and your knowledge. We hope to remain connected. Wish you all the very best and all the success. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Thanks to all the participants. Thank you, sir. We'll keep sharing the information of our upcoming Aadharshila Talks with you, and we would like you to be a part of it.